On January 6, 2025, Emmanuel Macron received the French ambassadors at the presidential palace of the Elysée and did not fail to pronounce on the rejection of French policy on the African continent. During his meeting with his ambassadors, he made a speech that created a lot of indignation. Listen to an extract.
France n'est pas en recul en Afrique.
No, France is not retreating in Africa. It is simply being realistic and reorganizing. I say this because when I read a good part of our press and many comments, people looking through yesterday's lenses say it's terrible that we are disappearing from Africa. No, we chose to move in Africa. We chose to move because we had to. First, we looked at our past, our memories, and our culture. We face the facts, we accept them, and we tell the truth. But we do not give in to misinformation and interference. Second, we had a security relationship. It was of two kinds in truth. One part was our commitment against terrorism since 2013, and we were right. I think they forgot to thank us. It's not a big deal. It will come back with time. Ingratitude, I know it well. It's a non-communicable disease. But I say this for all African leaders who did not have the courage to convey it to their public opinion. None of them would be with a sovereign country today if the French army had not been deployed in this region. After what the French president said, on the same day, Senegalese Prime Minister Ousmane Sonko responded via his Facebook account. President Emmanuel Macron said today that the announced departure of the French bases would have been negotiated between the African countries that decreed it and France. He went on to say that it was simply for convenience and politeness that France had given these African countries the primacy of the announcement. I would like to say that, in the case of Senegal, this statement is totally wrong. No discussions or negotiations have taken place to date, and Senegal's decision stems from its sole will as a free, independent, and sovereign country. Finally, he declared that no African country would be sovereign today if France had not deployed. Let us note that France has neither the capacity nor the legitimacy to ensure Africa's security and sovereignty. On the contrary, it has often contributed to destabilizing some African countries, such as Libya, with disastrous consequences for the stability and security of the Sahel. Finally, let me remind President Macron that if African soldiers, sometimes forcibly mobilized, mistreated, and ultimately betrayed, had not deployed during the Second World War to defend France, it would, perhaps even today, be German. The Chadian authorities reacted to the remarks of French President Emmanuel Macron through their foreign minister and denounced a contemptuous attitude towards Africa and Africans, stating that French leaders must learn to respect the African people and recognize the value of their sacrifices. They also affirmed that Africa, including Chad, played a decisive role in the liberation of France during the two world wars, a fact that France never really recognized. And to continue that, the immense sacrifices made by African soldiers to defend France's freedom have been minimized, and no worthy thanks have been expressed. In Burkina Faso, when the colors were raised at the country's presidency, President Ibrahim Traoré motivated the working staff and also responded to Emmanuel Macron's remarks. Let's hear it. I wish you a very happy New Year 2025 through you to all the staff working at the institution of the presidency of Burkina Faso. I wish 2025 to be a year full of health for you, your family, and your loved ones, so that you can give your all in your work for the happiness of our people. May 2025 be a year in which you will see all your projects crowned with success and prosperity, and above all, throughout the year, may God guide our actions, protect us, and watch over us. I would also like to remind everyone that the fight against imperialism must be in our genes now. It must be a struggle that is waged relentlessly and every day, because many people have not yet understood what this struggle is all about. Our valiant fighting forces are on the ground, fighting every day and holding firm to bring peace to our beloved country against the manipulated hacks, the criminals who scour our countryside. As much as they do, our working masses, the farmers and stock breeders, are also fighting so that we can achieve food self-sufficiency with the support of all the technicians at the Ministry of Agriculture. This is very important, and as much as they are fighting in the administration, we must fight to change their mentality. This mental decolonization is the hardest part, and that's why we're constantly reminding you that we have to change our mentality, go back to our roots, and fight. And that's what the fight against imperialism is all about. We are given every opportunity to understand imperialism and its manifestations. When I look at Emmanuel Macron's recent comments on Africa, any conscious African should quickly understand what he's been saying and what it means. Not long ago, General Chiani spoke of changes in the tactics or strategies of French forces in Africa, and I think he's confirmed this. It's a question of disbanding and keeping a base unit. Emmanuel Macron said it so well that we can only thank him for his sincerity, even if some people wanted to blow smoke in their people's eyes, but reality also catches up in the end. They won't be leaving certain African countries, they've just dissolved the system. You won't see them in bases anymore, but in embassies they'll be there. They're going to set up security companies to protect their companies in those countries. But the soldiers will be there. You won't see them in uniform or gathered in bases. That's all it means. They'll reorganize, but they'll be there. He spoke of being polite to certain heads of state, giving them primacy in announcing the breakup or departure of the French forces. It doesn't matter to us anymore, you might say, but all we know is that if you want to break with these imperialist forces, all you have to do is denounce the military agreements. It all starts there. I think the example of Chad is palpable. They started by denouncing the military agreements. Otherwise, if we don't denounce the military agreements, just say that the bases are leaving, we haven't done anything because the problem lies in the colonial defense agreements that have been signed since independence. The most dangerous are not those you see in the bases. The most dangerous are the military advisors. Military advisors exist in all these countries. They have existed in Burkina too until the end of 2022, until we assume our responsibilities. And who are these military advisors? They are the ones who are supposed to put France's policy into practice here. They have to work to make our armies very weak so that France can always have the argument to exist here. Under Blaise Compaoré, they succeeded. Our sentries stood guard with sticks. That's what France wants from our armies. When we get to this stage, we have no choice but to want them to move in. But at one point, the Burkinabe army managed to get rid of the military advisors. Unfortunately, I think that in 2019, after Operation Audible, when the French saw that the Burkina army still had the capacity to react to terrorism, they called the chief of staff in France. They instructed him to take back the military advisors throughout the structure. Well, he didn't accept, but on his return to the country, the politicians instructed him to accept the military advisors. And that's when the military advisors returned to the Burkinabe army in 2019. With all the consequences we know, the army was in the process of disappearing in the years 2020 to 2021. In fact, that's when a lot of soldiers had to desert because there was no more hope. We were falling apart. That's how they work. At the Joint Chiefs of Staff and all the army staffs in the schools, they're the ones who are supposed to dictate our army's policy. They tell us how many to recruit, when to recruit, and what to do with them. They are in the schools to tell us how to train them and so on. As long as these military advisors are there, you're not independent. Your army will just look like an army that's out there doing parades and circuses. But when war comes, you'll realize that parades are one thing, but war is another. It's the only way to build a strong, independent army, but many people don't understand this yet. And even with these defense agreements, France chooses cadets in our countries to train them. It's through these same agreements, but in reality, these officers who leave to train, for the most part for France, come to serve the French state in their own country. They don't come to serve our countries, they train them to serve the interests of the French state. As proof of this, when we revolted, many officers in Burkina who had been trained in France were immediately contacted to tell them that it was time to get into action, because that's what you've been trained for, to serve the interests of France. Most of these officers reported back to us. We've taken note and will continue to do so. When an officer trained in France arrives in his country and unfortunately dies, either by accident or on the battlefield, in France there is a night of mourning for the dead in the army, as elsewhere. At the Nuit d'Hommage aux Morts, the name of the officer in question is cited, and he is said to have died for France. They don't train them to serve their country, they train them to serve their state. And in many African states, there are plenty of these officers. How many of them are patriots? God knows. It's a lesson that Emmanuel Macron has given to African heads of state to catch up and really be able to lead this fight against imperialism. But on top of that, he also insulted all Africans in his remarks. There was one part that caught my attention where he talked about ingratitude, and that ingratitude is a disease that cannot be transmitted to humans. He is human. Our ingratitude is not transmissible to him. That's how this man sees Africa, sees Africans. We're not human in his eyes. Maybe he's the one who's not human. He doesn't put himself in the human class. But if ever there was an ingrate, it's him. I think that if he's not an atheist and he prays every morning, he wakes up and prays, he should pray to Africans too. Because it's thanks to our ancestors that France exists today. He should pray to us. In his eyes, we must not just be human, we're more than human. His messages are very powerful. As for me, I weep for the French people, but still he's good for Africa. He has a necessary evil for us. Those who want to wake up, wake up. Those who don't want to wake up, as they say, you can't wake up someone who's not asleep. Africans have to wake up. We have to work to be independent to ensure that our people at least know happiness. And that's what the fight against imperialism is all about. We need to decolonize mentalities. We have to take all these factors into account because the world gives us so many examples to see. For them, there are no morals. They may call you a terrorist today, but tomorrow you're a hero by their same mouths. They decide what they do. They talk about democracy, but they carry out constitutional coups amongst themselves. They talk about human rights, but they decimate populations elsewhere. Africans must wake up. Africa must wake up. And the fight against imperialism is permanent. And I invite you to join this fight, to work to ensure that we are truly independent, that we are self-sufficient, and that we can develop and enjoy the happiness to which our people aspire. Thank you. I wish you a very good day, a very good week, and a very good year. And that at the end of this year 2025, when we look back, we will have to say to ourselves that we have brought a great plus to our nation.